What's going on, mountain bikers? I'm Jason Schroeder, tech editor with Vital MTB, and I'm going to run you through my Giant Rain Advanced Pro that served as my test bike for this year. So I've been the Vital for just over 3.5 years, and this is actually the first personal bike I've had. It was my test sled for our 3 component test sessions that we did, as well as a bunch of other product testing. I was right in the middle of swapping between a bunch of parts, so I figured I'll start from mostly the frame up, run through what I've liked and disliked about the Rain, as well as which components I've picked as my favorite throughout this year. The most common response I got throughout the year when I told people that this was the personal bike I chose for this season was, really, a Giant? And I get it, Giant is a bit modest when it comes to their brand image and marketing, but they've also stuck with this Maestro suspension design for a really long time, which means that it's quite refined. And Giants are also a bike that I've ridden in the past and I've really enjoyed. They're predictable, responsive, but also planted, and they've always fared really well in a lot of different settings for me. When the latest Rain came out, it kind of ticked all the boxes that I'd want from a modern enduro bike. It's got adjustable geo, it's mullet compatible, has frame storage, it's got solid geo numbers, and it has a full carbon frame. The Rain is 160 in the rear and 170 up front, which is kind of my go-to have fun, get rowdy travel size. This year, Giant offered the Rain Advanced Pro in 2 builds, and I received the more expensive Pro Zero build that honestly probably wasn't that great of a deal. At $12,500, it came with Zip 3.0 moto wheels, SRAM Eagle axis, not transmission, Shimano's cheaper RT66 rotors, XTR compound Maxxis tires, and Giant's house-branded contact points. You can definitely find cheaper bikes with better components, simple as that. I think the Pro 1 build at $6,500 is a better deal. Comes with Fox Performance Elite suspension, a GX mechanical drivetrain, SLX brakes, and Giant's own carbon wheels. You could easily upgrade the brakes or drivetrain in time for way less than what it would cost to go with the build I received, and the frame is exactly the same. Looking at the frame itself, here's what I've really liked about the Rain. Out back you have a one-piece rear triangle, which makes for a very stiff rear end, makes the bike very definite in corners. You have a massive down tube guard that adds a little bit of peace of mind. It's also stayed on all year. It's not starting to peel off or anything like that. There is a drain port hiding under the lower shock mount, just to keep from water collecting, which was an issue on previous generation models. It's been a very quiet bike, even though the rib chainstay protector is a little modest. It's not the most aggressive I've seen. This is definitely up there for quiet bikes I've ridden. Manages chain slap really well. I really like how the water bottle cage is mounted a little bit higher up on the down tube. It just makes for a little bit easier reaching it when you are riding. Some bikes seem to put the bottle cage really low, which makes it tough to reach without stopping. I've had no linkage bolts come loose this entire year. It's probably one of the most solid bikes I've ever owned. I just took the bike apart. All of the bearings are still running smooth. I would say that I can get through this next winter without needing to think about replacing anything. No play is developed, no creaks, nothing like that. It's just been a bike that's chugged along throughout the whole year. I think I've taken it apart twice just to clean and kind of check on everything. I did install a tailored ride wrap at the beginning of the year when the bike was brand new before it ever saw dirt, which has definitely helped it stay looking in good condition. The frame is still in great shape. Been a headache-free bike to ride all year. It stayed together. It's been easy. All right, as for things that I have not liked about the Rain, there are a ton of spacers when it comes to taking apart the linkage. Probably the most difficult is the lower shock mount. You've got like 4 spacers, plus you're trying to slide the pivot through the lower link and the bearings in the frame. Can be a bit of a handful. Definitely takes some patience to put back together. Cables are internally routed through the front triangle. However, they are not guided through the frame. It's not that hard to actually get cables through the bike because you have access through the internal storage. However, you definitely need to wrap them in something. Otherwise, the cables are going to rattle and make a ton of noise. It's not a huge deal, but it's something that if you don't do, especially if you're bleeding your brakes and then you realize it after the fact, you're going to be pretty bummed because your bike is going to be quite loud. The storage compartment itself is nice and handy. However, the opening is not huge. I honestly did not use it that much throughout the year. I tended to just keep the same little hand pump and multi-tool stuffed in the frame, and if I needed it, I needed it. But I run a specialized SWAT water bottle cage that has a tool on the bottom, and that usually got the job done for most trail side things I needed. It does have a press fit bottom bracket, which personally hasn't been an issue. Like, I live in a pretty dry climate, hasn't made any noise, has been problem free, but for somebody that lives where it's quite wet, that might be more of a deterrent for you. And then the last thing is how your shifter cables ran through this bike. It dives into your chainstay right underneath where your chain goes. And so all year long, my chain has been steadily working its way through my housing. It's been one of those things that I keep telling myself I'm gonna get to, I'm gonna find a solution for, but I haven't fixed it yet. As for on-trail performance, as I mentioned, Giants have always been very predictable bikes to me, and the Reign has been just that. It's been a very comfortable and confident bike in unpredictable conditions, at bike parks, on gnarly downhill tracks, really just any terrain I've gone it in. I'm 6 foot tall and rode a size large that has a 480 millimeter reach matched with a 443 millimeter chainstay and a 638 millimeter stack height. The head angle is 64 degrees and the effective seat angle is around 77.7 degrees. For me, these numbers added up to a very balanced ride. The bike does ride a touch small compared to other size large bikes I've tested, which I've actually grown to like quite a bit. It makes it easier to influence the bike and move it around, which keeps it lively and fun on jump trails. But at the same time, it's not so small that it ever feels unstable or twitchy at speed. I only rode the Reign with dual 29-inch wheels just because that's what I prefer. And then I bounce between the slack and neutral flip chip. Neutral feels great for the trails I ride in San Diego that aren't very steep and are a bit tighter, while the slack position made the bike a touch more stable on steeper trails. Touching on the suspension design itself, I'm a big fan of the way Giant's Maestro suspension tracks the ground. It gives the bike a very planted feel that's awesome for holding the lines and just maintaining control. It also works great under braking, lots of traction and composure when you get into steep and rough trails, which always allows you to plow through compressions without getting bounced around or the bike ever feeling unsettled. At the same time, the Reign felt quite responsive for being a bigger travel bike. Part of this was it feeling a touch small, and part of this was just how supportive the bike was when driving energy through it. I had a lot of fun riding the jump trails in Whistler and Mountain Creek Bike Park this summer, as the bike was easy to throw around and didn't feel like it soaked up all my energy when pumping like rollers or hitting berms. Overall, I've just been really stoked and impressed by how versatile the Reign has been. It's held its own and been very capable in bike parks when I probably should have been on a downhill bike. It's also been enjoyable as my day-to-day pedal bike. Hasn't left me wishing I would have gone with a shorter travel bike for this year. All right, that's enough Reign talk. Let's go ahead and get into what components I've kept on this bike throughout testing this year, starting with the suspension. Up front, I have Öhlins RXF 38, which was the fork I picked as my favorite from our Enduro fork test sessions. It was my favorite as it offered a ton of adjustability with its 2 externally adjustable air chambers, and the damper provides some awesome control. It's also very light. It was the lightest fork in the test. It's truly a fork that as I've ridden it the rest of the year and have dialed in my setup, I've been able to push harder and harder. It might lack a little bit of the off-the-top suppleness compared to RockShox or Fox, but the harder you ride the fork, the more support and control it can offer. I weigh 180 pounds and I've ran between 210 and 215 PSI in the ramp-up chamber, and then 106 to 110 PSI in the main chamber. High-speed compression, I've been running completely closed, and then low-speed compression, I'm usually around the middle of the adjustments. In the rear, I spent most of the year on the DHX2 that came on the bike. Honestly, it was a very set and forget shock and always felt pretty good. I did have Fox revalve the rebound circuit a bit lighter so I could speed the shock up more, and then I ran high-speed compression mostly open and low-speed compression about in the middle. I did have the eyelet assembly unthread from the body of that shock, which was pretty wild. I've never had that happen before. Luckily, I caught it before oil exploded everywhere. I tightened it back up and it was fine for about another month. And then during our brake test in Whistler, it came apart again, but this time it was way more catastrophic. Oil went everywhere and the shock lost all of its damping. I was in a pinch and ended up just buying this RockShox Vivid Ultimate off the shelf from a shop. So that's what I've been riding the past 2 months and it's been really impressive. Feels crazy coil-like. All the adjustments allow you to create the exact feel you're going for. I have noticed on my home trails that are flatter and carrying speed is more crucial that I'm moving through the stroke of the shock maybe more than I'd like. So I'm planning to add some volume reducers soon to give the shock a bit more ramp and support. Alrighty, moving on to tires. I am running Maxxis' new High Roller V3 front and rear in their downhill casing and their MaxxGrip compound. We tested a ton of tires this summer in Whistler as a part of our Gravity Tires test sessions, and the High Roller came out on top, mostly due to how much predictability they offered, how calm and damp the casing rode and just how much grip and traction they have really in every type of soil condition. Looking at the tread design, you have really blocked, spaced out knobs, and as you'd expect, they do really well in looser, deeper soil, can really cut through and find traction. Surprisingly, they are almost just as impressive on hard-packed, firmer conditions. Riding like really sun-baked bike park trails, and then now that I've gotten back home and most of my riding here is dry or loose over hard-packed, these just find grip and consistent traction unlike most other tires I've ridden. If you're looking at these and you're like, dang, these just look like a tamed down shorty or something like that, I would definitely give them a try. I think that for people that have ridden an Ascii and that is like your go-to tire, this is maybe a bit more definite. There's a harsher drop off in traction, but it makes it a very predictable tire to ride. So yeah, this is what I'm rocking. All right, I have the high rollers mounted to a set of Hunt Enduro wide alloy wheels, and honestly, wasn't too picky about wheels this year. I rode and tested a lot of wheels, and I spent the most time on this set and then a set of specialized traversed mixed material wheels with a HD carbon in the rear and then a alloy traverse in the front. The mixed material wheel set was a part of a test I did at the beginning of the year, and I ended up choosing the HD carbon for the rear just due to its stiffness, and then the alloy in the front, just due to its compliance, a little bit more forgiving. That wheel set lasted until our Enduro fork test sessions, which took place at Mountain Creek in New Jersey. And unfortunately, I ended up blowing up the rear wheel, which is kind of ironic because I had originally picked it because it seems so durable. Shout out to Wheels Up Bikes for hooking me up with a wheel to keep doing that test. And then conveniently, right after that test, this wheel set showed up because it was our control wheels for our tire shootout that we did in Whistler. I rode these for a week in Whistler during that test, and then the whole rest of the year afterwards, including another week in Whistler for our brake test. I wouldn't say these are the stiffest wheels, and they have that kind of like slightly more forgiving, calm demeanor that you get with alloy wheels, which is something that I prefer. It gives a nice, comfy ride quality, and they've been quite bomb-proof. I've definitely have collected a few dents and wobbles, but you know, nothing outside of what I'd expect after a few months of hard riding. And the best part is they're only 630 bucks. For my drivetrain this year, XTR group set, I had 170 millimeter cranks, 32 tooth front chainring, and then a 1051 cassette. I have nothing against electronic drivetrains. I'm actually a pretty big fan of them, but I also appreciate and still enjoy that crisp feel of a mechanical shift. This drivetrain has been problem-free all year. I've ran the same shifter cable and housing. The derailleur hasn't become any louder by my standards. My chain is definitely towards the end of its life, and the cassette and chainring are cosmetically worn, but they're still shifting smoothly. Something kind of interesting is that my right crank arm has taken a beating from my chain since I'm left foot forward. You know, I spent about 3 weeks at a bike park this year, and just from spending so much time coasting and riding rough terrain, my chain has just been slapping and kind of eating up the bottom of my crank. The same could be said about the teeth on my chainring. On the underside, where the chain first starts to wrap around the chainring, again, just from riding a lot of downhill tracks and spending a lot of time mostly doing descents, you can tell the teeth are quite a bit more worn down from the derailleur and chain pulling as the bike goes through its suspension. Goes through its travel. One thing I just noticed while filming this is that my rear derailleur, the clutch, still feels pretty smooth. It's probably getting close to time to take it apart and clean it, but definitely could be tightened. It's could be a little bit more snug by my standards. Freaking bar spins, anybody? For brakes, I ran SRAM Mavens most of the year. They're super powerful. I love the bite point adjustment and the matchmaker clamps. The only issue was I never got them to not have a wandering bite point, which is an issue I've had with multiple sets on other test bikes. I've tried the piston massage, which does help or like alleviate the problem for a bit, but I've never got it to fully go away. And I've also had some sets that don't have the issue at all, which is also a bit annoying. When we did our brake test sessions in September, I picked Magura's MT7s with their HC3 lever as my favorite, just because they offer a ton of power, but they allow you to really control how you deliver that power. I also really like the ergonomics of the lever as it goes through its stroke and the adjustments you have to allow you to get that exact throw and bite that you want. In comparison, Mavens have a bit more all-out power, but I struggle to control that power as easily. They're really grabby and the power comes on all at once. And for the way that I like to brake, which is pretty gradual and often to remain in control, the Mavens just don't suit my needs as good as the Maguras. I've got some new 203 rotors front and rear, and I'm running the rear brake external still because I've been testing a bunch of brakes and it's way easier than bleeding brakes through the frame. I know it looks a little janky. I have a longer line for these brakes that I will put on once I finally put the brake line through the frame. To finish things off with contact points, I have Burgtec's Josh Bryceland signature ride high bar, 38 mil rise, cut the 790, 35 bore. I've paired that with a DEITY Copperhead stem, which is my favorite stem. It's got super wide clamping front to keep the bars from ever moving, really low stack as well. I have that in a 50 mil length because as I've ridden this bike throughout the year, I have gone up in stem spacers. I think I have 25 mils underneath the stem right now. So to kind of counter my bars coming back to me as I've raised with stem spacers, I decided to go to a longer stem, get me a little bit closer to that front axle. Also with the bars, it's Josh Bryceland, it's Rat Boy, can't not support him, and high-rise bars are the way, Dakota Norton. For pedals, I'm rocking DEITY's Deftrap composite pedal. It's a pedal I've ridden for 3 or 4 years now, and I really like the size of the platform. I like that the pins are a little bit smaller diameter. I find that they dig into shoes a bit better than like a fatter pin does. They're really cheap, and they slide over impact with rocks better than aluminum, where that tends to grab more. This year, I did actually go through 2 pedals for the first time ever. I bent one spindle at Mountain Creek, and then I cracked a pedal body in Whistler, which for running the pedals for a couple of years now, I'll take it, that's pretty good. I have the stock TranzX 200 mil dropper that came on this bike. It has been literally has forgotten it's even on my bike. No issues, it's worked consistently the entire time. And I can run it pretty much slammed in the frame, which is quite nice. I did swap the TranzX dropper lever that came with it, because it's kind of cheap feeling, with I think it's a V1 one-up dropper lever that I found in a box in my garage. I'm riding Greg Minar's signature Bartender grip from Burgtec, and it's got some nice little ribs that compress a bit and give you a little bit more extra hand cushion. And then to finally top it off, I have WTB's latest updated Silverado saddle. It's a little bit shorter than before, not the widest profile in the back. It's pretty slim, so it's out of the way when you're descending, and fits my butt well. It's comfy. Alrighty, that concludes my bike check of my Giant Rain Advanced Pro test bike for the year. Hopefully you enjoyed it, hope you learned something. If you're looking for a similar video, our other editor, Johnny, did the same thing for his Scott Ransom. You should definitely go watch it, as well as all of our component test sessions we did this year. As always, for more mountain bike news and reviews, you can head to vitalmtb.com, and feel free to let me know which bike you think I should ride next year. Cheers.